Well, hey, CSM. Man, how cool is it that we can still get together on Wednesdays and talk through what we have been talking through this whole semester? We have come to an end to the Ten Commandments. That's what we've been unpacking all semester, going into, diving into, and discussing. And we've arrived at the end, at the last lesson. But don't worry, we're actually going to be continuing our CSM Wednesdays. We're going to come to you with different content, different messages, and then we're going to go live each Wednesday at 7 p.m. So come back here every Wednesday around 6:30, and we'll be able to talk and hang out and teach together. So again, 10 Commandments arrived to the last one. If you think through what you went through this last semester and all the commandments that we went through, some we really related to, and some we didn't at all, and some were just really weird and complicated, and some made sense. Let me refresh your memory. So we talked about a few of them. Adultery was one, right? And then we talked about how lust is a part of that, which surprised some of us of like, dang, this is like a real thing. Adultery and lust can be considered the same thing. We talked about how stealing is more than just material things, that we can steal joy from people, that we can steal opportunities from people too. We talked about how there are so many idols in our life that we worship, right? That we put so many things above God, and we worship them instead of God. And we talked about the best one, honoring our moms and dads, right? We know this is so hard. It just is. But we discussed it, we unpacked it together, and we talked about it. Those were just some. But these commandments have just been so good talking about and discussing them together. And to be honest, this last one we're going to talk about is probably going to be the hardest one yet. But yet, it also may be the most simplest one that we have heard. And to me, this last commandment is kind of like a mic drop that Jesus gives us. And so let's read it together. Matthew 22:36-40 says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." So, if we're supposed to love the Lord with everything we have, what is getting in the way of that? Have you guys ever wondered what loving God really looks like? I'm being serious. Like, I know we talk about it all the time, but how do you love God with everything that you are and everything that you do in life? And how do we know if we're even doing it well? I honestly don't think ever in my lifetime have I ever said, man, I really loved God well today. Right? That's just not something we do or think about. At least I don't. If you do, then you're a way better Christian than I am. But I don't think I've ever just said, like, God, I really loved you well today. Right? And then moving forward, how do we love our neighbor as ourselves? What does that look like? What does loving ourselves look like in order to love other people? What about when it's someone really hard to love, which we talk about in CSM all the time? And now, how do we make sense of this commandment in relation to the 10 commandments that we've been studying all semester? We've been in the book of Exodus all semester, but tonight we're addressing the commandment that Jesus claims to be the greatest, which is in Matthew. Okay, what makes it the greatest? What happens to all the other commandments that we just have been discussing? Do we just forget them? Do we just drop them? Do we not follow them anymore? I'm going to read this commandment again in Matthew. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Okay, Jesus is all about the bigger picture. He does such a cool job of making us realize that we get caught up in the nitty gritty of rules and checklists and being legalistic about things. These verses show us that love was always the point behind the law and the prophets. It was always the point. Earlier in Matthew 5:17, he says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." He didn't come to get rid of them and say they don't matter, screw all that stuff. He came to fulfill them, to give them new life. Literally, all the 10 commandments can be broken down into these two great commandments that Jesus gives us. That's what is so cool about this, loving God and loving people. All the commandments fall in line with these two things. That's why they do matter. Because if we were to break them, it would go against the two greatest commandments that Jesus gives us. Can you honestly say, like, well, I didn't honor my mom and dad necessarily because we just don't have a good relationship, so I just don't honor them. But I do love God and love people, right? That's kind of contradicting itself. We can't dishonor and disobey people, but in the same breath say that we love them and we love God. You see how it goes hand in hand? These two commands that Jesus gives us, they actually come from the Old Testament, which is kind of awesome. So he's not trying to manipulate anything. Deuteronomy 6:5 says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Leviticus 19:18 says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. It was always about loving God and loving people. Jesus needed to say this commandment so clearly, not because it was new, but because we're so good at forgetting these things. We're so good at it. It's easy for us to make things more difficult than what they already are, right? Simple things don't really mean a lot to us. We love to make things really difficult. Jesus came and said what he said to bring life to something that was old. He gave this a new heartbeat so that we could live them out in a new way and live a life in a different and new way. That's what he's always been about. That's what Jesus has always been about. He's not about a religion or a list of to-dos and not to-dos or who is good enough and who is messed up. It's just been about love and grace. And it's been about loving God and loving people. So, how do we live our lives differently? There's a phrase that I absolutely love. I say it often. I heard it a long time ago, and I honestly can't remember who quoted it, if it was from the person who said it or he quoted it from someone else. But it says, try not to sin less, but instead just love more. Try not to sin less, just love more. When we focus so much on the do's and don'ts of our religion and trying to sin less, trying to make a to-do list of like, nope, I didn't do that, I didn't do that, we're forgetting the one thing that Jesus asked us to not forget, which is, hey, can you just forget all of that and can you just love me and can you just love my people? If we focused more on that instead of condemning the sinner, our world would look drastically different. Why are we so concerned with pointing our finger at other people? We are so concerned with how other people are living that we forget how we are loving. We do. We're so concerned with other people that we forget how we're supposed to love. Listen, the world is desperate for a love that looks different, especially right now. That doesn't go away. Our culture is begging. It is begging for purpose, for value, for stability, especially now. And it's literally our job. He has commanded us to bring that love into everything and everywhere we go, even if you're confined into your home. Jesus commanded it from us. Those are the rules, guys. Those are the rules, to love God and to love people. In a world that is in panic right now, in a world that there's so much chaos, where there are people that are scared, people are vulnerable, living in fear, how do we show up for people? How do we love God in this? That, for me personally, is the bigger thing. I'm doing my best to show kindness to people, to show up for people, to reach out, to see if anyone needs anything, to love on others that are hurting right now. But God, I I don't know how to love God right now in the midst of pure confusion. I don't, if I'm being honest. But I know He commanded it of me. So I'm going to do my best to figure it out. We've been gifted time right now. The only time in history where we can honestly say that we've been given more time than what we know what to do with. What could God be showing us with these two greatest commandments right now in the chaos that we're living in? How do we try and not sin less, but instead just love more, love people around us, love God more? Maybe this extra time that we've been given can help us evaluate how we're supposed to be showing up for people, how we're supposed to be loving people. And for me personally, how I'm just supposed to be loving God through this. Don't worry about all the other commandments. Don't throw them away and say they're trash. But let's look at the two greatest commands, because if we stick to those two greatest commandments that Jesus gave us, the rest, it won't matter because we're loving God and we're loving people. So what do we do with this now? CSM, I love you. Let's continue the conversation. Find a friend, talk through it, or join us on Instagram Live. Love you guys so much.